Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to our read-along of Frank Herbert's masterpiece, Dune. We are following the story now into its final section of the book, the section called The Prophet. And the Prophet is known to the Imperial forces, to the Emperor, we presume, but also to House Harkonnen, as a mysterious Fremen religious leader called Muad'Dib. And both Baron Harkonnen and his captured and repurposed Mentat, Thufir Hawat, think it's probably a bad idea to oppress this religion, since that makes religion stronger. So they're just letting it go. They're just ignoring it. And this has been true for a couple of years now. What they don't know is something that the reader of the book does know, which is that Muad'Dib is Paul Atreides. He is the heir to House Atreides. He is the person who has the most revenge to seek against House Harkonnen and the Imperium. Doesn't look at the moment like he's ever going to be able to do that. It looks like an extremely small stakes Lawrence of Arabia type thing, but that's not true. That's not true at all. Active, perspicacious readers reading this for the first time will be putting two and two together. That he's a religious leader of a fanatical fighting force that is better than any other fighting force in the galaxy, on a planet that is the only source for the spice that makes the whole galaxy run. Without it, there is no interplanetary travel. Without it, there are no secret societies with mystical abilities. Without it, there is no anything like that. But no one's put two and two together yet, except maybe young Paul himself. In those 2 years that have passed, quite a bit has happened. He and his mother, the Lady Jessica, have become integrated into the Fremen world. The Lady Jessica has become a Reverend Mother and given birth to the dead Duke Leto's daughter, Alia. And Paul has become a father as well of a young son named Leto, after his father. A young son that he has with his Fremen consort, Chani. And that is the world that we return to for this chapter of the book. The chapter that starts with Paul Muad'Dib remembered that there had been a meal heavy with spice essence. Because the spice isn't just the wealth of Dune, it's also extremely psychotropic. And Paul already has the ability, he already has fledgling prescience abilities, the ability to see flashes of the future in his dreams. The spice is only going to increase that. It's increasing prescience that makes space travel possible, for instance. And Paul is in a world where, as was noted right at the beginning of this book, spice is everywhere. There's no way to keep it out of your body. And the Fremen ingest it directly. So there's going to be a pronounced change in Paul, and he sees it coming. Of course, the problem with prescience is that you see it coming. It's a little bit of a drawback for an author. Frank Herbert was writing this book about characters who can see the future. Okay, and he's talking about Paul's his terrible purpose, and legions of Fremen warriors rampaging across the galaxy, sweeping all opposition in their wake. Because that's the future that Frank Herbert had imagined when he was writing this book. But when he was writing this book, Frank Herbert did not imagine God Emperor of Dune. He did not imagine a descendant of Paul Atreides who would also be named Leto, but who would not be human. And who would have one of the most profound effects on the whole of humanity for 1,000 years. He didn't imagine writing that book, and so there's not the slightest hint of the God Emperor in this book. The series is best read backwards, I guess, is a way of saying it. But this chapter, we go from the Imperial feints and games within games that we've been seeing in House Harkonnen back to Dune. A large section of the Fremen group that Paul and Jessica have been attached to have moved into the deep, deep desert, far away from Harkonnen patrols. A 20-thumper journey. And what that means is the Fremen use a mechanical device called a thumper. You implant it in the sand, and it does rhythmic thumping on the sand mechanically. And rhythmic thumping of any kind attracts giant sandworms, the sandworms that tyrannize the surface of Dune. And the Fremen know how to ride sandworms. They know how to use them. They can't domesticate them, but they know how to, once they call one, they know how to ride it until it's exhausted, and then they know how to safely dismount, let it go away into the sand, and then use another thumper to call a different worm. So considering how big sandworms are and how fast they travel, a 20 thumper journey is a long, long way away from the borders of civilization, from the solid ground on which cities can be built. And we get a glimpse in this chapter. Paul is talking with Chani, and Jessica is talking with Chani about what life is like in that far siege, those far sieges far, far into the desert. We get a little glimpse of what the Fremen who are there, the women folk mostly, do. They raise their children. They work on the technology that the Fremen definitely use. Their still suits are extremely good technology. The technology that they use to extract a body's moisture from a dead person is extremely advanced. It's not anything the Fremen built on their own, that's for sure. And another little detail that Chani mentions, reinforces from earlier chapters that we've seen, is that the people in those far sieges also mine the spice. They go out onto the sand and mine the spice in order to keep bribing the Spacing Guild not to put satellites in orbit over Dune. Which is one of the reasons that Dune is such a savage place in the first place. But the Fremen are doing things to Dune that they don't want anyone to know about. They are slowly dreaming of transforming the planet into a world that isn't all desert. But in the same chapter, Paul is told, that his son is a healthy baby, that he's growing fast, he's going to be a big man. But there's not a lot that happens in this chapter. I think it might be a tiny bit of a narrative misstep to go from all the cut and thrust politics of the last two chapters to this. It might have been a little bit more effective to leave a cloak of secrecy over this Muad'Dib figure a little longer than to remind us that, it's just Paul. It's just Paul and his mother. We don't yet see the full measure of devotion that Fremen have for him because he's not yet fully a Fremen. In order for a Fremen to be fully blooded into the community, he must be able to not only summon a worm, but mount it. And Paul has never successfully done that. He is doing that now. This chapter ends with him summoning a worm. He's been trained. He's pretty sure that he knows what he's doing. And if you are a first-time reader of this book, you can only hope that the scene of his initially riding a worm will be a little more interesting than the weird hallucinogenic boredom fest that was in the second Dune movie. You'll really have to hope that. It's not hard to clear that bar, though, so you will be pleased. But that's all that this chapter is. It's to show us a little bit more of Fremen life and to show us a little bit more of where Paul and Jessica are right now. Paul is having a little bit of trouble throughout the chapter, immediately and confidently telling himself whether or not something that he is thinking about has already happened or not. The more spices he ingests into his bodily system, the more he becomes a creature who is lost in the slipstream of time. More he becomes a creature of prescience. Which is going to come in very handy. When you're up against the forces that the Fremen are up against, that's going to come in very handy. But we don't learn much about his plans along those lines, and we don't learn much about anything else. So that's this chapter for this time around. We'll just move on to the next one from here, which at least has some fantastic action writing. But anyway, I'll wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.